Which is the best way to learn a new opening? How does an experienced player faces the challenge of learning a new opening to play it in tournaments? This is Fidemaster Mitchell and I'm still an active player. In official tournaments, the games are recorded and saved in databases, so it's easy to find most of the games that any professional has played, see what we play more often and prepare against that. That's why very often we need to expand our repertoire and learn new openings, so we can surprise our opponents and get them out of preparation. In this channel I have created many opening tutorials about different variations like Purse Defense, Petrov Defense, Ponciani opening, etc. I have played some of these openings for many years, so making a video has been relatively easy for those, but I have had to learn others from scratch, either for a YouTube tutorial or for professional tournaments, and in all these years I have learned how to play, let's say, at an advanced level, around 20 different openings. In this video I give you 5 steps that I always follow when I need to learn a new opening. Let's get started. So the first step that I always follow is to focus on the main line. So no matter the line that I'm learning, I try to understand as much as possible in the main line. I'm not going to look at any side line, I'm not going to look at any variation. I'm just going to see the most common line, the best variation for both white and black, and I will try to understand as much as possible in this variation. Personally, I try to go as deep as around 50 moves, but this is depending on the specific line that I'm learning or how sharp or theoretical this line is. But also, for example, for beginners or intermediate players, very often around 8 or 10 moves might be okay. Let me show you with an example. So let's say I want to learn how to play Trompowsky attack, and we play d4, knight f6, and then bishop g5. I'm just going to look at the main line. Black plays knight e4, that's the main option. The main option for white is bishop to f4. They play c5 here, and then we're going to play f3, queen a5 check, c3, we cover, knight to f6, and then d5. Then queen b6, bishop c1, and then after e6 we play c4. This is move number 8, so let's say it's fine up to this moment. So if I'm learning how to play Trompowsky attack, I'm going to look at this line and I will try to understand as much as possible. Let's say we are here, and then after knight e4 I'm trying to understand the moves of this line. He's attacking my bishop. Bishop f4 is more or less clear. The bishop is still very active there. Black plays e5, attacking our center, and in this position the knight is in the center, so it makes sense to get a tempo and make the knight go away. So f3 is actually more or less clear once we understand the position. They play queen a5 check, and the next move here is c3. And this is also more or less clear because you don't want to block and giving the option of trading when this is a piece that is threatened and that we have to retreat. So c3 makes sense. Also, you're reinforcing the center, creating a chain of pawns. So c3 is more or less clear. So knight f6, and I continue trying to understand the next move, d5. It's more or less easy to understand because I'm getting more space in the center. I'm not letting the knight be developed, so it's also clear. Also, he was taking the pawn here on d4, and I cannot take with the pawn. So yeah, d5 is more or less easy to understand. Black plays here queen b6. They are attacking the pawn. So the next move in the line is bishop c1. Actually, this move, bishop c1, is not so easy to understand because you're on developing the bishop, and there is also this option of b3. Also, you don't need to understand everything. That would be some moves that even with engines, it won't be easy to understand those moves at the beginning, at the initial look. So it's still fine, it's totally okay. Just try to understand as much as possible. Not necessarily you're going to understand everything. So bishop c1, let's say, for example, that after b3 you're weakening a little c3, and you're also weakening dark squares a little. Probably you need to play c4 later to reinforce the center. So let's say with the king in the center, you still need to play some moves. You don't want to weaken the area over here, the dark squares in the center. So let's say that's the reason bishop c1 is played, which I think is more or less the real reason. So black plays here e6, and they are taking the pawn, and we need to reinforce that pawn. So c4 makes a lot of sense. We are defending that pawn, and also we are developing the knight over c3, so it's very easy to understand c4. So it could be something like this, what I do in the first step. I focus on the main line, I try to understand it as much as possible. I advance around 15 moves in the line depending on the specific circumstance. Let's go to step number 2, and in this step I'm going to filter masters games. So I'm going to go to my favorite website or my favorite chess tool, and I'm going to filter the games by masters where they play the line. So I'm talking about Trompowsky attack again as an example. I'm going to the main line, I mean the main position, like move number 2 here. When we play bishop g5, we're in Trompowsky. I'm going to go here and I'm going to filter Masters games with this line. For example, usually I go to, let's say, to chess base, and I try to filter Masters games with this line. So I do something like this, position, and I copy board, and then I try to filter Masters games with this position. Once I have a list of Masters games, I try to sort by rating. Like, I try to find the best players. This time, for example, with white pieces. So the best players with white pieces that have played that line. And then, for example, I might find games by Carlsen, by Nakamura, by elite players in general if I sort by rating. So that's the idea with this step. The benefits: A, I can see some of the most common side lines. So I can see the lines that my opponent can play, other than just the main line. So I can take a look at that. I can get some idea about which are other lines. B, I can see mid-game ideas. Again, this is like very slight, very quick look, but I can get some idea about what is going to happen in the mid-game. C, you can make decisions about the lines that you want to play. For example, when I learned to play Trompowsky attack, I used this method, and I realized that after knight e4, besides the main line with bishop f4, there's this interesting variation, which is raptor variation with h4. It's very dynamic, it's very sharp, it's aggressive in some lines. So I decided that this was a line that I wanted to include in my repertoire. And actually it's a line that I play even more often than the line with bishop f4 nowadays. And this is something I found in the second step, where I was looking at Masters game. The third step is to take a look at some side lines. At this point, I have already a grasp about which are some of the lines that my opponent can play other than just the main line, because I have already seen Masters games and I know the line a little better. So again, using Trompowsky as an example, we can see that after bishop g5, my opponent can play knight e4, that's main line, but also in Masters games, when I featured, I could see that there are options. For example, some masters like to play g6, a King's Indian approach here, and they just don't get into the main line. Or some others just play d5 here, or some others just play c5 directly, and also there is e6 here, is another sideline. So what I'm saying is that at this point, I'm going to select some of those side lines. I'm going to take a look at how to play against those. I will use probably the opening explorer from chess.com or Lichess or any other platform. Then I'm going to select the option that I want to play against that sideline that my opponent is likely to play. This is similar to step number 1, similar to what we did with the main line. Well, we're now trying to understand and get familiar with some sideline that I know is common, that my opponent can play it more or less often. So I'm just going to look at the most important sidelines. This step is also a very good moment to create a PGN with the moves that you have selected, because at this point there are some variations, like you have like a tree of lines, right? I play this, my opponent can play this or this, and against A I play some line, against B I play some more line. So the tree is going to open more and more. It's going to be harder to remember the lines later. So for my repertoire, I have a PGN in my computer, and I use ChessBase to manage that PGN. When I include a new line or when I'm going to change something, I always work there with my PGN repertoire. But also you can use any other platform. One more time, you can use Lichess Studies or chess.com library, and you can create your own repertoire there, and you can, update that repertoire with new lines or changes or anything. Step number 4 is think about what is going to happen when the theory is over. This step is very important. In almost all the videos about opening tutorials that I have created in the channel, I try to explain what is going to happen once the theory is over. For example, I try to talk about mid-game plans or typical tactics or typical structures, or where should your pieces go or should your pieces be in the mid-game, because we are not doing much if you learn how to play 8 theoretical moves, but then you don't know what to do in the move number 9. So it's really important to understand what happens once the theory is over. And also, for example, keep in mind that your opponent is not going to play theoretically all the time. Very often your opponent doesn't know the line, and he's going to play something different. And whenever that happens, you need to understand the position. You need to know typical squares, typical ideas, your typical threats, your opponent typical mistakes, and typical structures. In this step number 4, it's very important to write notes in the PGN about the most relevant things that I see in the line. Like, be careful with the bishop coming to b4, or watch out for that check, or keep in mind that you should keep this pawn in the center, or remember that you attack on the king side. So you can write relevant notes on your PGN so you don't forget those things. Remember that sometimes you're going to play this opening like 1 year later, and you're not going to remember everything then. So in this step, it's very important to write notes and comments and typical ideas about the line, so you remember those ideas in some time, but also this is going to help you understand much better the line and the position. Finally, step number 5 that I follow when I try to learn a new opening, and it is play games and keep mastering the line. And this step can actually delay from days to months. That's very interesting because you're going to be mastering this line as much as you want, as much as you need to learn. So the idea is that you're going to be playing, for example, blitz games or maybe rapid games with that line, and this is going to help you get better in the line. There are many benefits of this step. You will memorize the line, so you don't need to be like just memorizing, right? That's boring. You don't need to be 1 hour memorizing the line. That's also not very effective because the same way you learned it quickly, you can forget it quickly. So it's much more effective if you learn it and you lose a game, but then that experience will help you remember for the future that that's not the right move because there was a refutation, and it's much more entertaining, but also I could say it's more effective that way. So that's one thing. A, memorization. B, mid game. Again, in this step, you're going to understand much better the mid game. A lot of things will happen in your games. You will make mistakes, your opponent will make mistakes, you have missed wins. So a lot of things are going to happen, and you're going to learn from those things. And this is going to help you with the mid game of that line. You're going to get better in those mid games. More games you play, more games you analyze, and more you learn about the line. That's it. So you will get better in the mid games when you play games of that line. And see, you can see typical reactions at your level, because something very important here is that some lines are very common at the elite, but not so common among beginners. This happens with Sicilian defense. At the elite, it's the most common move for black against king's pawn, but among beginners, not so much. So something like this can be happening. Your opponents probably are not playing the most common moves among masters because they don't know the theory and the move is not very logical, so they don't play it, for example. So in this step, you're going to see which are the most typical reactions, and you can focus a little more on those lines. If you guys have any question or anything to add, I would be very happy to interact, so let me know in the comments. Check out this video over here. I'm sure you will enjoy it. Thank you, like, subscribe. See you on the next.